What's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 24/7. I'm Cody Goodwin. Got a fun show for you guys today. It's the bye week for the Crimson Tide. It's a good time to kind of relax a little bit, reflect, reset, and take stock of some things. That includes recruiting, which is why we've got Brett Greenberg, our Bama 24/7 recruiting guru, on the show today. Brett, my man, how have you been?
It's been a while. How you doing, Cody? We were just talking before the show just about your trip to Wisconsin. Seemed like a good time for the team and you guys up there. But no, it's been a good time. I'm glad you guys got at least a week to reset before considerably big game, I would call it, in 2 weeks. Arguably maybe your biggest regular season since coming down here. But yeah, recruiting kind of never sleeps, and it's kind of picking up, like you said. You know, like I said, with the Georgia game coming up, there's a lot of recruits that I'm sure we'll get into later in the show.
That Alabama Georgia game, big on a number of different fronts, right? SEC, first SEC game for Kalen DeBoer, first SEC game for Alabama. It's going to carry not like do or die implications, but like it's going to factor into maybe how the SEC gets decided, what the playoff picture ultimately looks like, and then obviously for our purposes here, a lot of big name recruits for 25, 26, even maybe some 2027 guys. Do we feel old yet? I feel old just saying that. Going to be on campus that weekend. We're going to get into all of that with Brett today. He's here to catch us up on all things Alabama recruiting. We're going to discuss the 2025 class at large, how it stacks up, remaining targets that the staff is after, some positions of need. We'll also look ahead to maybe some 2026 guys to know as big-time visitors for that Alabama-Georgia game. But I wanted to start here, Brett. There have been a number of talented freshmen, true freshmen, 1 year removed from high school, who have played pretty significant snaps for Alabama already this season. We all know about Ryan Williams, obviously. We also know about Zabian Brown, too, but also Red Morgan, Jalen Mbakwe, Zay Mincy's played some snaps. Caleb Odom, your guy, has gotten quite a bit of run at receiver. Here's a fun fact for you. Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard lead Alabama with 12 targets each through 3 games. Number 3, Caleb Odom. Wow. 8 targets through 3 games. Who'd have thought that, right?
That's a nice fantasy pickup.
Hey, if you play college football fantasy, something to keep in mind, right? But Brett, I bring this up because you covered most of these guys as recruits, and now you're getting to see them play big-time football on Saturdays. What has that been like from your perspective to see these guys not only navigate the recruiting process, ultimately sign with Alabama, but then to see them play as immediately and for some of these guys, really important snaps right out of the gate?
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about it. You know, most of the guys you named, we kind of talked about throughout the whole recruiting process to signing day and leading up to, spring practice, fall, about names to know. Obviously, you got the Ryan Williams, Jalen Mbakwe, Xavier Browns. And like you said, those guys have been thrown into the fire. They've had to. I think you were talking about with Chris Harmer earlier. Kalen DeBoer was talking about, like, hey, we don't need to play Ryan Williams. All of a sudden, like, you need to play Ryan Williams, and he's delivering. You like you said, you're throwing Caleb Odom in there. He's getting looks. Jalen Mbakwe, I talked about how important he would be on the back end, obviously at the cornerback, but also on special teams, and we're seeing that as well. He made a great play. Seems like he's probably earned that spot, and it's kind of his to lose at this point. Maybe it looks a little bit different against SEC play. I'm not really sure. That's for Cody and Mike and Alex to talk about. But it's been cool to see. And I think kind of off the field as well, one thing that's been, you get a lot of more access to these Alabama players to begin with, but certainly the freshmen, obviously Jalen Mbakwe and Ryan Williams have that podcast, but they haven't changed, and which is really cool. And for them, obviously Ryan Williams is 17 years old. We've talked about that 1,000 times, but to go through this and the change they had on the first day of class for Nick Saban to retire and still trust that, and to go through everything they did to, going to school as a freshman, not playing football is tough enough. I think that's just been cool to see them not change. But again, like you said, yeah, they're producing and they've had to produce, and it's going to be, interesting to see. I've had a couple conversations with friends, just, interested to see when they get into this SEC schedule, because, like, it's a different animal. And like you and Chris Humm were talking about, those DBs at Georgia are grown men, and on the other side as well. So again, to kind of wrap that up, it's just been very cool to see all these guys being thrown in the fire and succeeding.
And the circumstances are different, right? Like Ryan Williams is a special talent, right? Like he's a guy that you probably just can't take off the field at this point in time. But like guys like Xavier Brown, Jalen Mbakwe, and even Zay Mincy to a little bit lesser extent, a lot of turnover in that DB room, right? So a lot is asked of those very talented freshmen right away. And like you said, they're stepping up and they're delivering. And just, I guess, to see that the staff is willing to play these young guys as early as they are, for a guy like Caleb Odom, who probably don't need him this year, but the fact that he's getting out there and he's not just getting snaps, but he's getting targets. They want to see what they kind of have in him. I imagine that probably resonates with a lot of guys that are still going through the recruiting process. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a lot of like the conversations I'm having right now, like kind of specifically Caleb Cunningham. He's a guy that talked about the offense and seeing Ryan Williams. And then you talk to him after the first 2 games and he's like, he's 17-year-olds doing that. I'm looking forward to doing that. It kind of puts more confidence in me that I can do that. And another thing kind of on top of that is more specifically, maybe the defensive scheme and the cornerbacks like that I talked to and the safeties. It's like what these coaches are really across the board, what these coaches are selling me, what they're telling me in this recruiting process, what my position is going to be, how versatile it's going to be. It's showing on the field, which is another assurance for these commits. You talk to a guy like Dawson Merritt, takes a trip to Nebraska, kind of ruffles some feathers on our board. I know it over on Twitter as well, but he told me point blank, the first quote he told me is like, Twitter kind of has a way to blow things out of proportion. And I kind of gave him that opportunity to, why are you taking a visit? He's like, I live 2 hours away. It's a great game. It's Colorado. Why wouldn't I go? You would go. I said, he kind of called me out. And I said, absolutely. So, but again, he brought it back to what Christian Robinson was telling me about this Wolf position. Watching those guys succeed in their versatility has been a real reassurance in a lot of these recruits' minds that are committed. And a lot of guys are kind of taking a little bit more stock and saying, hey, this is looking good. Again, I mean, we're going to keep going back to this. SEC play starts and it's a whole different animal. But, what they're selling them has been true so far.
Going to dive into Alabama's 2025 class, currently ranked number 2 in the country, according to 24/7. Only Ohio State currently has a better recruiting class, but Alabama is ahead of LSU, Auburn, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, a bunch of teams that they are going to probably see or have to deal with later on in the season if they ultimately want to get to where they want to go. Alabama has 20 total commitments for 2025. That includes 14 in the top 247, 6 in the top 100, and 4 5-star guys as of the rankings right now. The most recent commitment, I wanted to start here. A.K. Deere, 4-star running back, top 50 overall guy from Mississippi. He committed about a month ago, so it's been a little while, but we haven't gotten you on the pod to talk about it, Brett. What do we need to know about A.K. Deere? This seemed like, at the time, this commitment was a long time coming. Now that he's officially in the fold, what is Alabama getting in this guy?
Yeah, real quick before you say that, I kind of brought it up while you were saying it out loud, and I've seen it, but Oklahoma has the 10th ranked recruiting class and are 8th in their conference. It's crazy to me. That's just recruiting the SEC is just a different animal. Yeah, I mean,
like telling me that it just means more, Brett.
I know you love that phrase. To get to A.K. Deere, yeah, you're right. It was a long-awaited commitment. You kind of go back to the spring. He talks about how big of a factor Robert Gillespie was, and hey, I'm going to take a visit. Then he goes to Ole Miss. He commits. You talk to a couple of people around him. It was kind of like, we didn't even really know he was going to commit to Ole Miss type of thing. It was kind of out of the blue. I don't really know what happened there, but you get him back on campus for an official visit. He decommits from Ole Miss. He ultimately commits to Alabama 2 weeks later, which ultimately seemed like a lifetime for Alabama fans. But you kind of told him, keep trusting. Alabama did a good job there. Turns for the Champions Cookout. Then he commits, and everything he says to me and I talk to and his coaches and people around him is, Alabama's a school for him. He's locked in. Yeah, there's Ole Miss, there's Mississippi State, there's some other schools that are still going for these guys. And it's almost, I say it all the time. It's once you committed, your recruitment kind of almost starts even more now. You kind of get ramped up even more. But I continue to hear he's locked in, and he's continuing to kind of get ready for that next stage. He was talking to me. He's just, I said, what? He's like, it's playing for Bama. I mean, like, roll tide. Like, he was just so excited. And that was kind of nice for Alabama fans to be able to read, and good for, us to hear. But overall, it's a great pickup. And you pair him with a guy like Anthony Rogers, which I know a lot of people have had some questions about. And, he's had a kind of a quiet recruitment, but he said months ago, hey, I'm committed, but I'm going to take visits. And I continue to tell people on the board, it's okay to take visits. Everybody in that situation would take visits. I mean, and you continue to talk to guys around him, and it seems like Alabama's still, his school. And, you add those two, we'll get into it, but you look at that offensive class, and it's certainly a lot of firepower, and the defensive class could be even stronger.
A lot of the work from the cold summer seems to have held for Alabama in this specific recruiting class. I think I'm a little curious as well. 20 total commitments. There's still a lot of, I think, pieces out there or positions out there or players out there that Alabama is still working on to maybe polish off this 2025 class. What positions and maybe more specifically, what players is Alabama going after to, kind of finalize this 2025 class? Like, who are the big names that people need to know through the fall?
Yeah, I kind of hit it right there. There's not really much on the offensive side of the ball. I kind of give a quick wrap right there. You got Keelan Russell, who continues to kind of ascend. He's, had a great 2 weeks so far. I talked to Andrew Ivins, head of scouting for 247. He said, I kind of see a little bit of Jaden Daniels in there. So, that's a nice comparison. I know it's a kind of a tall comparison, but it's nice to hear. You got a guy like Caleb Cunningham. You look at the offensive line and Michael Carroll, Ty Haywood, Micah DeBose, Mal Waldrop. Those guys all seem locked in as well. But really on the defensive side, the obvious concern, and it really kind of around the country, is the defensive line, the interior guys. There's just not a lot of them around the country. Alabama's missed on a few this cycle, but they're still on Justice Terry, who I feel like we've covered. I think we've talked about it maybe a year ago, even on here, just a guy to know. He's a guy from Georgia, 5-star. Anybody who's a subscriber here has read a bunch about him, but he's a guy that Alabama has continued to do a really good job with. He's someone that seems like a Georgia lock. He's from Georgia. He's been to Athens 1,000 times. He's going to visit 100 times more probably before a decision. But it seems to be that the Crimson Tide are the only program with a true shot. He showed up to the USF game. He'll be back for the Georgia game. A win like that could go a very long way. And then Alabama's handed out a couple more offers around the defensive line. 3-star Florida D-line commit Joseph Mbachu from Loganville, Grayson, Georgia. He's a guy that's kind of, maybe wavering a little bit, or a whole lot of uncertainty in Gainesville, not a little bit of uncertainty in Gainesville. So anytime there's presumably a head coaching change, there's some uncertainty there. But he's a guy that's kind of had to reset his recruitment. He's gotten offers from like Texas, Auburn, Georgia, Ole Miss, a bunch of other schools in the last month. So he's kind of taken a step back there. Another guy that's kind of on our radar is a guy, Christian Ingram, unranked right now, but 6'6", 280 pounds. Anytime, guys like that, you kind of pops out the page. He's out of Georgia, Florida, and Alabama in the last 2 weeks. He's going to be there for the Alabama-Georgia game. He's going to be at the Georgia-Auburn game in Athens. He's a guy that's going to take it very slow. He's waiting till the February signing day, which, is considered late, but it's just rare at this point, which is fine. And, people feel like there's kind of a rush these days, but there's really not. And another guy to kind of wrap up that D-line class, kind of that bandit role, is his name's Tim Griffin, picked up an offer 2 weeks ago. He'll be back 2 weeks ago while he was on campus. He'll be back. That kind of wraps up the D-line. And I know Alabama fans continue to ask about it. You've got a guy in London Simmons. He's a 3-star, but he's playing really well. Had 4 sacks last week. Talking to Andrew Ivins, he's a guy that could maybe boost up the rankings. Another guy that we're still working through the database to get onto the list is Joseph from Canada. Remember Joseph Muawamba? He's over at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He'll be enrolling in January. He's another big body that's playing well, playing in the middle over against kind of grown men, so to speak, at community college. So he's another guy you add as well. But that kind of wraps up as far as the D-line looks right now.
Seems like the defensive line is the primary position of need. I'm curious, another name, he committed from Florida State, Javian Hilson. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. One time committed to Alabama, right? And he was one of the many guys that decommitted after Nick Saban ultimately retired. Is there any movement on him, or has that ship sailed, or do you know?
So I reached in on him because he had visited, even after he decommitted, a couple staffers went and visited him over at in high school. He had visited for spring practice. He had told me, he goes, they're giving me a lot to think about. But then he kind of, you don't really hear anything. Then, some reports come out. He's thinking about visiting Alabama. I haven't heard much beyond that. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we're kind of at this point. You talked about it. It's, if you're a recruit, you're trying to get to this Alabama-Georgia game, the staff's going to have to turn people around. he's not one of those guys. So if he wants to come to Tuscaloosa, he will certainly be there, and we'll continue to track that as well with him.
Before we dive into maybe some other names to know, I'm kind of curious, just from the recruiting beat perspective, this was a pretty good list of defensive line guys for the 2025 class. You've mentioned that there's going to be other names for 2026, but it's, different class. There's probably going to be different needs and different targets that the staff goes after. How much of this time of the year is spent trying to finish 2025, but then also trying to get that head start on 2026? I mean, you mentioned there's probably a lot of pressure on a lot of these kids from some coaches to commit early and get it out of the way and not have to worry about it for another calendar year. And I know Alabama did a lot of work over the summer with their cold summer and, getting a lot of commitments between May, June, and even a little bit into July. But how much is the staff trying to, okay, we got to focus on this to finish this class, but we also still need to get a jump start on 26 and make sure that class is ready to go for, the next calendar year. What's that balance like?
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of the easy answer is there's no balance. I think you kind of just got to go all hands on deck here. Obviously, the priority is 2025. And I've had some conversations with some people, and I've talked to Scarborough about it. It's like almost you can't really tell how this staff's going to operate till even the 27 class, because the 25 class, you think about it, they're behind. So they're always working from behind. So maybe that delays the start of the 26 class. So I've kind of wrestled with that in my mind. But as far as 26 goes, they're certainly putting a lot of pressure out there for commitments. You talk to people and say, hey, they're talking to me every single day. These are highly ranked guys in state. They have a commitment in Dorian Barney. But, like you said, I mean, 2025, you have the number 2 class. You've got 20 commitments plus Steve from Canada, or Steve from Mississippi by way of Canada, excuse me. And it's a very good class, but you got to work to keep them in the class because, like I said earlier, these NL offers are going to start coming in. You got a guy like Michael Carroll who gets an offer from Miami. He's maybe checking out USC. Those schools have a little bit in common when it comes to recruiting. They're a little bit ahead of the game when it comes to NIL. So, and then you got to put your finishing touches, and it kind of goes back to, you're going to have to turn some people away. And if you have 100 kids on campus, that's great, but you got to be able to talk to these kids as well. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think it's one that these coaches certainly know what to do there. But again, I keep going back to they were behind on 2025, and they worked their tail off to put together a great class this summer, and it's holding together, but you still got some work to do.
You mentioned all the D-line targets as part of the efforts to finish off 2025. When you look at 2026, the list that you put on Bama 24/7, I encourage everybody listening to go check it out and subscribe if you haven't looked at it already. A lot of talented dudes that are going to be at that Alabama-Georgia game for visits, a lot of really talented targets that they're trying to lay the foundation for to maybe have another cold summer next summer or cold spring. I don't know exactly what Courtney Morgan's going to come up with when it comes to that, but what are maybe some of the bigger names that people need to know in terms of who is visiting for Alabama-Georgia?
Yeah, I think it's guys that we've, hit on quite a few times. It's in-state, Sadarian Morgan, elite wide receiver. He's a guy that I think is going to ultimately come down to schools like Ohio State. He's that type of receiver. If that kind of speaks to the prospect he is, obviously the long line of Ohio State receivers, and they've prioritized him. But I think ultimately it comes down to an in-state between Auburn and Alabama. I think that still got a long way to go, but getting him back on campus, again, seeing a guy like Ryan Williams succeed and doing like that goes a long way. There's, on the defensive side of the ball, we've talked about him a lot as well, as Anthony Jones. Xavier Griffin. Xavier Griffin's a guy committed to USC. He and his mom are from Alabama. They stayed there till he's about 10 years old, moved to Atlanta. He's committed to USC, but he's kind of seems like one of those guys that is an early commit out there and doesn't really hold his mom, a huge Alabama fan, not afraid to show it. Had to change her Twitter profile a little bit once her son became kind of a national recruit. But yeah, that's one I'm kind of closely watching as well. You can go see the full list. There's a tons more. And again, there's even 2027 guys there. It's going to kind of be a who's who, and it's good luck to this coaching staff being able to kind of check in on all these guys. And, quite frankly, all the attention needs to be on Justice Terry. But again, you gotta lay the foundation with a lot of these guys, and you're doing well with a lot of the guys I named as well. So it should be interesting. It should be fun. And, we go back to everything matters on the field, and you you got to have a good showing. It may not matter for this regular season as far as the playoff go. Both these teams may make the playoff, like you said and Chris Hummer said earlier, but this is a big deal for many different levels, like you opened the show with.
There was one name that in the 2027 class that I did want to ask you about, and this may seem like a yeah, duh type of thing, but Xavier Sabb, the younger brother of Keon Sabb. How much is Keon being here? I don't know how much conversation you maybe had with Xavier or just people around that camp, but how much does Keon being here, and not just being here, but really balling out at that particular position, like that's got to help really lay the foundation for Xavier Sabb, who is, I mean, one of the top players in that 2027 class. I know that's kicking the can way down the road, but that seems like that has to matter, right?
Yeah. That's a great, 100%. And I've talked to he's actually got there's a middle brother, 2026, I believe 4-star athlete, Amari Sabb. Talked to him quite a few times. I talked to him right after the game when his brother had 2 interceptions. And they were like, who's in Bryant-Denny for the first time. Your brother gets 2 interceptions. You move, across the country, and the whole family's there. They're excited to see. And they like what they saw on the field as well. So I think that goes a long way. They're going to be back for Georgia. They'll be back probably for a few more games. And, the big brother likes it. I would probably like it too, type of thing. I think, so it's going to be interesting. I think like a guy like Amari, Xavier is going to kind of have his pick of where he wants to go to school. But as long as Keon continues to succeed and seemingly has a lot of fun in Tuscaloosa, that seems to probably go a long way, like you said.
I wanted to ask you about Cedarian Morgan. You mentioned him, pretty key 2026 guy, in-state receiver, just immensely talented athlete. I know we talked over the summer about Keelan Russell from Duncanville and how much he was helping to recruit basically that offensive line that's coming in with him in that same class. Does Keelan Russell's continued rise, progression, shooting up the rankings, how much does that factor for a guy like Cedarian Morgan, right? To be able to, if he commits here, he would get to obviously come and play and catch passes from a guy like Keelan Russell. How much does that matter? How much have you talked to Morgan about that, if at all?
Yeah, it matters a ton. I talked to him. I haven't talked to him in a little bit, but when I talked to him a couple months ago, he brought up the quarterback, and Keelan had already committed to time. Most of these receivers I talked to, that's one of the first questions I bring up. And it's funny. A lot of them have no Keelan or either exchange messages with him. He seems to be just kind of a good guy, which helps, obviously. Good guy in the way Jalen Milrose, and people kind of gravitate towards him. But no, it's a key factor. And another guy, a key recruit that's going to be there is Tristan Keys. He's a receiver from Mississippi, similar body type to Caleb Cunningham. I believe he's the number 3 receiver in the class. Very, very similar traits and kind of the same recruitment, so to speak, with Caleb Cunningham, kind of those high-class schools. But, obviously you got Ole Miss, Mississippi State. He said, hey, I worked out with Keelan Russell at the UA Future 50, a summer ago. He's a great guy. We still talk every once in a while. And it doesn't, we talked about it as well. And Keelan Russell's about that. A lot of other commits are about that. And a lot of these current players are too. Daniel Hill was very, very, very key in getting AK Deary. He talked about that. Him and Ryan Williams were like, obviously the coaching staff and Coach G did their jobs, but those two, went to work. There needs to be some type of, I know we barely write about Ryan Williams, but maybe there needs to be some type of like behind the scenes of just really how instrumental he was to this. And maybe I'm setting up an assignment for myself, but it's just been cool to see. And again, Keelan Russell's been a big part of this 2025 class, and you made a great point there. He's kind of getting the interest of 26 guys already.
Last question I will leave you with here. Obviously, the focus through the fall is shoring up the 2025 class. You mentioned all those defensive line targets. That's kind of the position on watch. When it comes to 2026, when do you believe, or do you have a sense of when these guys will start announcing their commitments? Is this a thing that people need to kind of wait until after 2025, or could you anticipate a few more coming this fall?
Yeah, I fully anticipate more coming this fall. I don't know when. I don't know who. I only say that just basically looking at the commitments list. You talk to a lot of these national guys. It's like these guys are committing earlier and earlier. You look at the quarterback position, who Alabama does not have a quarterback in that class. It's like people are like, oh, what are they going to do? And it's, maybe seem like a dumb question, but I believe it's like 9 out of the top 10 are committed somewhere, and maybe more than that or something. Like it's kind of outrageous. So there's a little bit of pressure to maybe get going. But you've got a very solid commitment. Dorian Barney, I talked to him recently. He seems to be very locked in. Again, a lot can change, but you got a long, I know I said there's a lot of pressure to get going, but you've got a long way to go. But, the early returns continue to, I guess they're not early anymore, but the returns on the field continue to boost positive results on the recruiting trail. And again, I like to say, like, these guys getting back on, if they come for a game and they want to come back, that's a win. So, and these guys wanting to come back is good to see if you're an Alabama fan.
100%. Always good to catch up with Brett, our recruiting guru, clearly full of knowledge and insight and intel when it comes to anything and everything Alabama recruiting. That's all we've got today, guys. I appreciate Brett coming on, sharing, basically spilling his brain for us on anything and everything recruiting. We'll be sure to have him back on as needed through the fall, especially again on that second bye week later in the season. We'll be back on this show. Believe the tentative plan is Sunday. Get back on that Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday routine to get you guys ready for the monster Alabama-Georgia matchup. Going to be a fun week leading up to that game. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 24/7 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports so you can get all of Brett's recruiting intel. Everything he writes, literally everything he writes, is behind the paywall. You need a subscription to read it. And if you learned anything from today's show, I suggest you do that because he's more than worth the price of admission. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.
See you guys.